All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody to our Healthcare and Life Sciences Summer Camp number 2. I'm Amy Waldron. I'm the Executive Business Lead for Healthcare and Life Sciences at Google. And today we are joined with Riley Ennis and Dr. Justin Chen as we talk about closing the gap, blood-based testing and the future of colorectal cancer screening and detection. As some of you may know, colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of cancer deaths. When detected and treated before it spreads, it has a 90% survival rate. However, unfortunately, we have 41% of the eligible Americans.
You were thinking of her in the back of your mind.
Oh, thank you. So like I was saying, 90% survival rate for those who actually are detected before it spreads if it's treated, and 41% of eligible Americans aren't up to date on their screenings. So that leaves us with about 60 million people out there who need to be screened. Today we've got Riley Ennis, who's the co-founder and chief product officer for Freenome. He's going to provide us with an overview of their groundbreaking cancer detection work and how they're partnering across the ecosystem to close the gap and help save lives. We also have our very own Dr. Justin Chen, who's a clinical specialist at Google Health. Google Health is known for their groundbreaking research and serving as clinical advisors for all of our product groups across Google. And collectively, we have a mission and we're striving to help billions of people live healthier lives. And the way we do that is we think about how do we actually help get information and tools when and where they're needed to support decisions. So in addition to the consumer products that we have, we think about search and YouTube and Fitbit. A lot of our innovation comes through with the customers that are on our cloud platform who are leveraging our leading AI, much of which has deep healthcare context thanks to Google Health, and we'll go through some of that today as well. So Freenome is a great example of accelerating medical advancements with our technology, really to help elevate health outcomes. So with that said, let's do the rules of the road, and I will hand it over to Justin. So as a reminder, this is recorded. The entire series is going to be recorded, and we're going to be sharing it at the end. Make sure that you pin the slides in Google Meet so that you see the slide in the best viewing experience. Add your questions to the chat and I will bring them up during Q&A or at the end. And then make sure that you're muted so that we can focus on the speakers. So with that said, Justin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really excited to be here and talk to the whole group here today. Wanted to talk a little bit about 2 specific examples of what we're doing on the healthcare front to enable organizations and actually even individuals in empowering them for things like improving health outcomes, cancer detection, and ultimately cures for cancer. And so I think the overarching thing is really 4 pillars. So one is we try to meet people where they are, so where they are as an organization, where they are as an individual, and sort of their tech journey and also their health journey. We're trying to transform organizations that are working within health. And then we're also trying to foster an overall ecosystem. We recognize health isn't just us at Google. It's not just specific companies or organizations. We all have a stake in this together. And then, of course, the last thing is no talk is complete these days without mentioning AI. So these 2 examples I'm going to give are more AI specific as well. This is something that's come out of our great team called HiDef, which is Health AI Developer Foundations. I won't go into all of the details here, but we have 2 different umbrellas of offerings that are open weight and available to the community at large. So we have medical embeddings, and we have generative models. And for the embeddings, we have multimodal capabilities as well, including pathology and imaging. And then we also have generative models like MedGemma. We also are supporting the organizations in a different manner as well in terms of what we offer on Google Cloud and the different tool sets we have available to individuals. So this is a really busy slide. I'm not going to go into everything, but I want to highlight a few things. So on the left in the blue bar, we have enterprise security, safety, governance, administration, and model armor. I think that's just to say that we really try to bake in security and privacy throughout everything that we're doing. On the top, we have AI applications for business users. So you can think of those like end users and consumers, and then agent builder for developers. So this is an AI forward kind of infrastructure slide. The reason I wanted to put this out there is that it's not just about things like MedGemma that are multimodal capability models that are specific for healthcare, but things like how do you support the infrastructure? How are you building the scaffolding to meet the needs of your organization? Or even if you're an individual developer, like how do we meet your specific problem at hand? And so these, I think, are like the really important things to keep in mind for how we as Google for Health support organizations like Freenome in their mission for cancer detection. So with that, I'll pass it over to Riley.
No, thank you so much, and excited to be here. And even building upon, that application layer of how Freenome wants to empower engaged health systems really to get people screened is a core to the data we collect. It's core to the blood-based testing that we develop. And it's all around how do we personalize, advance this future of early cancer and even disease detection. And, we think about this in 3 core pillars at Freenome. One is you need to find the individuals. And it's not just who needs to get screened based on guidelines. It's looking at risk factors. It's looking at multimodal data from historical mammograms. And it's taking everything we can to triage who needs to get screened and who might be at risk of different tumor types. The second is the detection. And it's using a set of analytes in blood that we're currently in the submission process for our first application in colorectal cancer. And this is where we combine, disparate multimodal data sets, really improve the accuracy of blood-based testing, and excited to be advancing with our final FDA module over the summer. And then, of course, how do we take, any of the insights and that early detection and then empower the downstream physicians, biopharma companies, and others to make sure that patient is treated and has the available information that could be helpful downstream. So when we look at, on the next slide, why colorectal cancer is allowing us to really validate this entire care continuum, and also really surfaces some of the existing challenges that occur today in CRC screening. And as alluded to at the outset, there's so many people that need to get screened that are eligible and have coverage reimbursement, but are not participating today. And colorectal cancer, although is number 2 in terms of the mortality, is on track to be the number 1 cancer killer by 2030. And this is a preventable cancer. And what's critical here is for that big chunk of people who are not participating today, what are the reasons and rationale? What are the resourcing? What are the health equity challenges and barriers to access? What are the educational gaps, the transportation? I mean, we've heard and seen firsthand, but we need to systematize and provide solutions that at the point of care can be implemented to close those care gaps and provide, multiple options to improve our ability to screen for CRC. And the reason we chose colorectal cancer is not just the unmet need, but as you imagine, when we think about existing screening modalities today, let's say in lung cancer, about 18% of people who need to get screened for CRC also need to get screened for lung cancer. So by offering, I think the Freenome test and the ability to analyze data to triage and surface who needs to get screened, you can imagine this world of how you go from one indication and scale beyond CRC in the future. And with respect to the evidence and our FDA submission, we want to just highlight our current performance associated with the test and our ability to detect not only the colorectal cancers, but having robust detection for stage 1 CRC in particular compared to other blood-based modalities today. And in our recent JAMA manuscript, we demonstrated between 79% and 81% CRC sensitivity. And this is to reflect not only the empirical data, but also the intended use population, as there's different distributions of clinical covariates. And what we have really observed is the robustness of the test in the intended use population at that 81% and 90% specificity. So exciting. And this is the version 1 of our test. And as we continue forward, we'll continue iterating and improving on, the existing platform.
Hey, Riley, do you have a sense with regards to some of the questions asked, like, how does this compare to Europe, where I presume screening uptake is higher? How does this, impact the utility of Freenome. Like, can you share anything from a global perspective as to what's going on in this area?
Yes, I would say both globally and even depending on health systems, and certain provider groups and even payers may have high adherence. Some may rely more on stool-based testing. Some may rely more on colonoscopy or even sigmoidoscopy. And we see this globally, that primarily countries either have no organized screening program, or they rely heavily on what's called a FIT test, which is a very cheap test to drive the overall adoption. And I think what's important is finding the pockets where people are currently unscreened and remembering that blood-based testing goes well beyond colorectal cancer. And even in our current test, we have 10 other indications that are embedded and analytically validated in the platform. And the goal there is to start finding those folks that are dual eligible for a lung, a breast, or other tumor types. And that's where I think, the future can really go beyond just the people who are not getting screened today. So even globally, when you have some countries that are relying heavily on stool-based testing, the value of having one blood test that's personalized to multiple indications is going to drive that global adoption, but also solve some of those unmet needs in the near term.
And I can add on a little bit in the global frame of things, which is, all of these different regions have varying standard practices clinically. And these are also driven by different regulatory frameworks and payer frameworks. And when we talk about sort of a global ecosystem, this is actually something really important to keep in mind. And different providers, different patients living in different places will have different needs. And so how we understand that is definitely a challenge. And then how we tailor specific solutions to those people where they are is another one.
Absolutely. No, I think this is going to be the name of the game today. A lot of tailoring and personalization, and that's key. I mean, that's how we think about extending any platform like this to solve needs. And I think that's what's exciting, is that a lot of provider groups, globally are looking at ways of how do we use some of the advanced tools and software and even point of care to drive that more personalized approach. The key part of that is understanding the problem. And that's where our real-world data clinical informatics teams have worked really hard to curate and understand from real-world data that's out there, what can we understand on some of the existing gaps in care. We would love to apply this to global data sets as well. As any of the findings that we observe in the US can potentially be applied, but also there could be lessons learned. And by curating and having a larger population, I think some of the key themes, one we wanted to highlight in particular, which I think really informs and guides when we think about potential solutions. But some of the existing challenges aren't always around just getting the access to testing. Some of it can just be educational. And I think one pretty concerning and very eye-opening data point that the team found was that 50% of people who had an abnormal stool test, so a positive non-invasive test, did not go on to a follow-up colonoscopy within a year. And by really digging in and understanding, some of the root causes, a lot of cases, people are being told that they might have hemorrhoids when they're younger, and that blood in stool is not necessarily always indicative of colorectal cancer. So that becomes a huge educational opportunity, an area that we can publish and really help surface, some of the unmet needs and issues that go well beyond just the screening modalities themselves. And that's where taking more of a holistic approach and really surfacing the data in a way that allows for care teams to understand some of these gaps is going to be critical to, I think any technological implementation, especially now, it's building that trust through data, empowering people who are working directly with the patients to make the best and most informed decisions, and also for us to collectively learn globally from any of these themes and insights that we can gather. And that's a core part of, the solution and software that we built. And as well as the evidence plan that we have. And Google's been a very helpful partner as you think about that implementation. The last thing we want to do is add more operational burden to very busy and I think overly burdened delivery teams. And on Google's Looker BI platform, we've been able to not only replicate a lot of the analyses and work, but start to partner and engage health systems on how do we think about the the identification of individuals who need to get screened, surfacing these insights on a real-time basis, and also really understanding through our early access program, which will start in January of 2026, on some of the individual steps where you might lose patients, where is blood-based testing going to have the biggest impact, and even starting to collect data on some of the other indications that we'll pursue in the future in terms of dual eligible patients for lung cancer and breast and others. So it's a very exciting time, I think, not only in terms of people's interest and openness to new technology. I think for the first time I was on a clinical advisory board with several health systems where they wanted to train a specific agent to help with colonoscopy navigation and referrals, and really reminding people that if you have a positive test, you need to get a colonoscopy, and it's not hemorrhoids. It could be, but it's more likely, that you need to get that colonoscopy due to, the presence of colorectal cancer. So really excited just to be at this stage and with this early access program, and leverage the data that we have alongside Google and other health systems to really have a sustainable model for any care teams and health systems. So just wanted to give that overview. Excited to dig into the Q&A.
Excellent, and we have a lot of Q&A. So the first one is going to go to Justin, just to kind of refresh a little bit on the models that you talked about. Can you just share with the group? There's a question about how are the models trained, tested, and validated, and what types of sets go into creating those models?
Yeah, that is a great question. I showed a lot on that slide, and more of the details are available in each of those specific examples. And there's a technical report that goes out as well, and there's model cards that you can look up. But just to be giving a high-level overview, we have Gemini, right, which is the frontier model that most people know about. We have Gemma as well, which is an open weight model. So Gemma itself has been trained previously. For MedGemma, the team then took that and then added additional training data sets. And there's various data sets. There's a mix of largely open access data sets, but some proprietary based information as well. The paper goes into more detail, but there's radiology images, histopathology images, some derm images, some ophthalmology images, and of course, a lot of text-based information and data sets. So text-based meaning question answers in different domains. And then there's also been additional work to get some synthetic fire EHR type of data to provide some training there as well. Needless to say, like it depends on what specific model you're looking at and what training data went into it. And more details are available publicly. So if you just do a quick search for some of these models, you'll find like the blog post or a technical report, which goes into all of those juicy details. The team also took like the next step as well of comparing the model performance with other state-of-the-art. And so again, I'm using MedGemma as an example, but there were comparisons with Gemma itself, with MedGemma, and then also with frontier models.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's two different avenues with regards to where we're seeing customers obtain medical context from us. One is through the developer models that Justin just talked about, which with regards to kind of accelerating development of applications and reducing the costs are phenomenal. We also have customers that are leveraging AI and Vertex AI search for healthcare directly from cloud and building those into their existing processes. So two different avenues depending on what you're trying to do, where you can leverage the research work that's been done by Google Health. So a couple questions with regards to kind of what else are you considering to do? Here's a question, wondering if Freenome and Google are willing to expand the scope to other liquid biopsy markers, such as CTCs. If yes, what technology would you consider to capture them? And I would add on to this question too, also like, what else are you thinking about, if not this?
Absolutely. I mean, when we think about the heterogeneity disease, you have to take a multimodal or multi-omics approach. We've always believed that. And you have to start early in vetting to your point, probably is more on, what are the cost efficiencies? How do you scale up to millions of tests per year? So the methodologies we evaluate tend to take consideration both the biological accuracy and clinical accuracy, but also that path to the manufacturing scale up and implementation. And, I would say there's no one size fits all. And the key for us is really making sure that you run the right studies, collect the data, and also preserve the residual material to do those assessments. And you just be open-minded and really understand, what the cost of goods needs to look like and what scale. And that usually is where technologies fall apart, is to meet, some of those needs when you're thinking about reaching millions of people, especially when you're talking about very early, more CTCs or oncosome type technologies. Some of those can be a little earlier and not as scalable. But that's generally just how we think about. And the key, again, is just we cannot all be wed to a single technology. Doesn't mean you throw the kitchen sink at everything, but you can optimize for clinical accuracy based on these different, I think biological prisms is the way to look at some of the underlying analyte data.
Right,
Yeah, and I
excellent.
can tack on to that a little bit too. As a physician and as someone working at Google, so as a physician, like those things that you mentioned, CTCs, cell-free DNA, alluding to MRD testing or minimal residual disease testing, these are like at the cusp of cancer diagnostics these days. It's a really exciting space right now. There are entire companies built around this. A lot of this is moving into the clinic and getting prospectively validated in clinical trials. And to Riley's point, this is like a perfect example of how we're pulling in information from different modalities here, right? When we're in front with the patient, we're trying to hear their story and what is important to them in treating their individual cancer. We're pulling in information like imaging, like lab data, but also some of these really exciting novel technologies. On the Google and technology side, for us, I think what we're trying to do is make sure that all of that data is protected and in a scalable way. We're keeping in mind the global impact of this because data coming from specific regions have different restrictions, laws, and privacy concerns as well. And then to Riley's point too, is like, how do you provide infrastructure so that compute and storage are optimized? A lot of these data sets are huge and take up a ton of storage, and processing it additionally is really computationally heavy. And so things that we think about a lot at Google are like, how do we have the tools within our toolkit to address these problems, to optimize the data flow and make sure that people can generate insights, analytics faster, make decisions faster, organize that information faster, and then execute on them.
Justin, while we have you, there's another question on NetGemma. So with regards to the models, NetGemma and all the models that you mentioned, are they freely open to use for building on, so can people take their personal projects? This one person is training Pan-Africa community and wanted to know how someone would get access to this information, and are there any learning certifications, et cetera. So can you explain kind of how people would get access to these capabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So these models are open weight. So like you can take them and run with them. There's even sample notebooks that tell you how you can do some fine-tuning exercises for specific use cases. It's available on Hugging Face and also on Vertex AI for our own platform. And there's, a lot of different ways people can take this. So if you look up LinkedIn posts and other places in the community, people have started taking these and played with them and evaluated them. So it's really interesting to see what's come of all of this. So I would point you towards the direction of the paper and looking up some of these resources online to see some ideas of how you can get started with this, no matter who you are, where you are.
All right, excellent. We have one more question with regards to the content that's already been covered. And then Riley, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about kind of moving forward and how you actually have started to scale, or you're thinking through how do you bring this great technology and actually work with other ecosystem partners. But first, there's a question about patients and their, is there evidence to show patients that do not partake in the stool-based testing that they would partake in the Freenome testing? In other words, like there's probably barriers with both. And like, what is the thought process on kind of what you know and how this possibly would work?
Yes, so we've looked at historical claims data in folks that are currently unscreened or not up to date. And within a 2-year period, between 80-90% of people have a venipuncture claim or a routine lab or some other indication that a blood test was did occur. So there's always going to be folks that might prefer a different modality. And at the end of the day, some of the stool-based testing can be quite accurate. I mean, the proximity to the tumor is very close. So that's why, as we think about that scale and offering a solution to health systems, it's providing all those options to the patient in a streamlined way and characterizing blood for the people that will adopt. But we do know from the claims data, and I think we all can speak to anecdotally, many of us have gone blood tests. Stool testing is different. It's not something people are used to. Sometimes it's at home. You have to go to FedEx and ship it. There are a lot of logistical barriers and other challenges. So no guarantees that blood will, help crack that 40 to 60 million people who need to get screened. But we safely assume that at least 10, 20, 30% of that pie will use a blood test. And there's, evidence to show that for, people who are at average risk, that blood-based testing will meet the clinical benefit and utility.
All right, excellent. This question that just came in is very similar to the one that I kind of teed up for you to cover content-wise, but let me just share with you what the question is, and then maybe you can cover this when you talk about how you're trying to actually bridge the gap of having this data and this capability from a detection standpoint. How are you actually getting it to impact the consumers, partnering with the ecosystem? But here's the question. Are you partnering with healthcare providers and insurance companies to ensure Freenome's blood tests and colorectal cancer detections are covered by health insurance? Additionally, are you pursuing FDA approval for your model's use? And what is the current progress towards achieving that approval? So maybe you can take a step back before that question and just talk about how have you navigated the ecosystem? Because part of the challenge, it's great having the ability to do something, but especially in the US, it has its challenges of actually getting into the ecosystem and being able to exchange data, insights, value. Like, can you share a little bit about this journey and how you've created that trust data exchange and then address some of the questions that were just asked?
Yes. And I think the key point there within the question is delivering value. And at the outset, as I'd share from what the team had looked at in terms of claims and real world data to characterize this problem, starting to work with health systems to share some of those insights and findings, they start to be a part of the solution. And we had about 100 or so clinical partners that supported the clinical validation study, which was that 40 to 50,000 person study that we just published in JAMA. And the reason we had so many groups participate is two things. One, they viewed Freenome as providing a holistic solution and providing value today in terms of those insights, better understanding their patients, their members, and being a part of that journey was actually a big part of why they participated in Preempt CRC. The second is the future roadmap. Physicians in particular and payers want to understand what Freenome is going to do beyond just colorectal, and how are we thinking about additional indications. And there's different liquid biopsy approaches that are trying to target a lot of tumors for everyone. And we've really stayed laser focused on this concept of, can you find the folks that are at risk and tailor the sets of indications or analytes that match that population so you can optimize for clinical benefit. It sounds simple, but that strategy resonates. And it's likely why we've had a lot of individuals work with us very closely as part of our studies, because they believe in the mission and they believe in the vision, the roadmap that we have, and just the way in which we approach this co-creation, and that we really want to understand the gaps and challenges today and fill those together. It's a mindset, it's an approach, but it allows you to build trust and I think establish those relationships. And it feels good to solve problems, even before our blood test, is through the FDA process. And just to address that question, yes, we are in the middle of our FDA submission, final submissions in Q3 of this year. And that's going to be a key part. And coverage and reimbursement also follows with why health systems in particular and providers and payers ask a lot about that longer term roadmap. Because if you don't align with their clinical incentives as well as the health economic considerations, it's hard to sign up to a 4 or 5, 10-year, long relationship. When we think about how long it's going to take for some of these tumor types to really build the evidence base for screening. But that's where you start, is where the evidence is. You add value today, and you really demonstrate that you're going to iterate and learn with your partners to solve those problems at scale.
Justin, did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to echo a lot of the same things that Riley said, and I saw some questions come through that kind of pull on that thread a little bit. But yeah, I think it's a great question. The regulatory framework is really interesting and definitely evolving here. It's not only a new test, but it's a new paradigm of screening, because we've relied on FIT testing and colonoscopy for a long time. And these exciting technologies are totally changing that game, in addition to baking in like the machine learning and AI aspect as well. So I think, all the stakeholders in this space are really looking at what the landscape is right now and where things are going to head. And so there's a lot of uncertainty here, but a lot of really excited and passionate organizations and people, whether they're in a regulatory setting or providers, patients, or organizations like Freenome. So I think there's more to come on this. We'll see. There is FDA approved blood-based colon cancer screening test out there already. And so I think some of that work has already started, but this is a ever evolving landscape.
Yeah, I think given what we're seeing with regards to healthcare costs and business models with payers and providers, now more than ever, there is, I think, a willingness across the ecosystem for people to start partnering. Because as we look at the total cost of care and value-based contracts and the volume of data that exists today that actually can give us insights, it really is like a win-win-win-win. When you think about payers, providers, biotech, and the consumer, being able to have this insight and being able to truly be proactive when you think about the cost of care and just the difference between getting someone at stage 1 versus something that is much more complicated. The cost of care and the care journey, I think, is just so much smaller and simpler, but also for the end consumer, it is life-saving. And so this is the point where there really is little to no barrier. And I know that you guys, Riley, you've done a great job working with us on confidential data sharing. So even as there are ways, like for every barrier, it seems like there is a way to get through it. So the confidential data sharing that you guys have created on GCP, it does help people preserve their own information, but have the ability to share data so they can get meaningful insights. Let's shift over. There's a question about regulatory focus in the queue. So given the increasing regulatory focus, is Genome coordinating with initiatives like ONC, FDA, or HL7 on transparency and reporting standards for clinical AI models? Currently involved in the HL7 Fire AI Transparency Project. And while we're tackling similar issues around explainability, attribution, and provenance, I'm curious how you're aligning on that front. And Justin, it would be great for you to chime in on what you're seeing as well.
Yes, so I can jump in. So absolutely following all the FDA regulations, and we are involved on the HL7 side. And in general, taking a step back on the AML front for the blood test, not for surfacing patients. But I think what's really critical is bringing people along for the ride. We started with linear models. Our current model is linear, so it's very explainable. People need to understand the biology, need to understand where else they can interpret, and even sharing data back with groups to be able to do their own research. And I think that's something I would really call for everyone here to be very open to, is I think we silo data too much in healthcare, and it's at a disservice of patients. It's much better for us to collaborate, and the more we break down those walls together, it's just going to be easier. And I do think some of the solutions that Google's created allows us to more seamlessly and protect data and really get people comfortable with that hurdle. And it also just builds, I think, the right fabric of trust that we need across the ecosystem. So the transparency, though, as we think about our more nonlinear and less explainable models, I think what we found is, first and foremost, you need extremely robust benchmarks and clinical evidence. And that's why, working closely with the FDA put out guidance around what's called a predetermined change control plan and how they look at future changes to highly regulated products through different mechanisms. Some could be even, faster than traditional, historical paths. And I think the fact the agency is stepping up to provide guidance, which everyone can find online, speaks to the willingness to partner with some of these more advanced models and think through, how do we get comfortable with the level of evidence and how do we get comfortable with the level of transparency that needs to exist, for, let's say, a nonlinear liquid biopsy type model to eventually be in clinical practice. So we really do crawl before we walk and run. But the exciting fact is all stakeholders are putting forward the frameworks, the support, the data, the technology, as the willingness to collaborate on a big problem like early cancer detection. And that's where we feel as a team just so lucky to be a part of this journey. And it's just amazing to see how many groups are really stepping up to think differently and unlock these solutions while still being mindful of the regulations and ensuring that we build towards some of these more complex models. And we don't necessarily need to jump there today to solve these very near-term problems, for example, in colorectal cancer.
So there's a question about doctors trusting AI. And so the question was how comfortable are doctors with regards to trusting AI and kind of making medical decisions and leveraging information from the EMR? So what we've seen, and Justin, please chime in as well as Riley, is that we've come a long way over the last couple of years with AI and generative AI. And so the medical context and the ability to ground and also cite the sources has come a long way. So what we're seeing with regards to doctors using generative AI, we're seeing it a lot with regards to medical search over the EMR, as well as search over medical protocols. And the way that we're actually doing this is making sure that not only is there medical context, but how are you grounding in the right data, but also creating the transparency. So the technology that we are creating and helping our customers use is not creating a medical answer, is getting information to the right people. It kind of goes back to the information and tools, kind of when and where you need it. So being able to have models that have that medical context and that are trained and grounded helps the model understand what information needs to be pulled and served, but it still is that doctor that is making that decision, and that doctor has the ability to literally see the source of where that information came from, where it's been served. And that's the same thing with the work that we've done with ASCO, with their searches of our protocols. Like, it really is, like, we will continue to make progress, but with regards to trying to create the comfort and of the quality of the information, a lot of it is putting those steps and protocols in and constantly challenging ourselves and the models. And it's not as if a model goes out there and it's just kind of left. Like, they're constantly being managed and thought through. Justin and Riley, do you want to weigh in on kind of what you've seen over the last year or so?
Yeah, I think it really centers in on a question about trust, safety, and transparency, and all really, really important, especially when we talk about healthcare. There are kind of two aspects that I see as far as AI adoption. One is the user, and two is the use case. So physicians are end users of these kinds of things, or people are trying to make them the end users of these things. And different physicians and users or nurses or whomever they are at different stages of adopting this sort of technology. And that might be at an individual level or at an organizational level. For use cases, I think it really depends on where you're using it. So I like to think about whether something meets the bar of a medical device or an intervention that needs to be regulated. And if that is the case, back to Riley's point, you really got to test these and provide a robust data package. It's not so dissimilar from doing drug research where you're running large clinical trials and looking at all the data and teasing everything apart to understand if the risk and benefit ratio really makes sense. There's other use cases that are probably lower hanging fruit, right? Like if there are administrative use cases or tools that can help, not necessarily with medical decision making and guiding treatment, but things like medical scribing, right? Like we already see that happening a lot in the ecosystem right now, and people are using scribes to help lower that burden of administrative tasks. So it's a really broad swath, but I think thinking about the user and the use case specifically gives different flavors for where things might make sense and might not make sense.
I just building upon that, I think when you look at use cases that are tangential to your core, let's say highly regulated questions such as early cancer detection, I think one concrete example that we saw was that colonoscopy navigation, and that actually the time to schedule correlates with whether or not people do complete that colonoscopy. And if there is a large wait time, somebody struggles to find a GI that has availability, or finding somebody as a shorter wait list, if you can solve that problem, you'll get greater adherence and compliance downstream. That's a problem that not only physicians want to solve, payers are going to have quality measures around that very specific use case, and that's you can start overlaying AI in a way and implementation in workflows that people can get more comfortable with, on this holistic, more collective journey. That's an example of a very low-hanging fruit that, for anyone who's approaching a highly regulated space, such as, let's say the early cancer detection, looking upstream and downstream can kind of help find those lower hanging fruits, but allow you to bring people along for the ride and get them more comfortable. And as they start to get to know your organization or just the overall ecosystem.
All right, Riley, we've got a question for you here. It says, Riley, you mentioned expanding multi-omic markers on colorectal cancer. What challenges are you facing in integrating diverse biological signals while preserving model interpretability and clinical actionable across indications? Probably a word or two missing there, but do you want to weigh in on that? And Justin, if you have anything to add?
The biggest challenge is scalability. A lot of amazing science sometimes when you envision looking at, let's say, some very novel RNA in circulation, translating that to a cost-effective, millions per test, fully automated system is the challenge. I think there's a lot of great signal that can improve the accuracy, but how that translates into a diagnostic is, I think, the greater challenge. Even regulatory, everything else downstream gets a lot easier if you can solve that scale, consistency of data generation, and be able to meet a cost profile that meets what the health systems and current reimbursement frameworks exist today. And I would say that if there's any novel analytes where we struggle to meet those scalability criteria, it doesn't mean that that technology needs to go away. It just takes more time. And I think the more you can give research and science the time to mature and evolve, that's where the big innovations happen. And I think organizations, really be thoughtful about giving the space and time for earlier research. We can't do everything all the time, but I do think that's an important attribute. And the same goes with deep learning and AI. We were under the assumption it would take hundreds of thousands or millions of data sets to see generalizability, but really excited that at the ACR conference just last month, we presented our fragment level deep learning model where our team has started to see generalizability and beating a linear model on very high dimensional small data sets, which has rarely been seen in the clinical diagnostic field. But I think just speaks to how letting research evolve and do the right studies and have the right data sets can enable a technology that we might think is not ready. But you have to be willing and have the courage to do those studies and have the patience to let science, find the truth and get through the evidence process.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really important is doing the science, getting all of those different patients involved in the science as well so that you can extrapolate to the right groups. There really is a challenging issue with heterogeneity in doing research, and I think that speaks to different people that live in different places with different risk factors and different exposures. And this is also continuously evolving through time. And I think one of the great examples is we are seeing earlier colon cancers and other cancers as we move with time even. And so while most of our screenings for colon cancer have an age cutoff of 45 or 50, there's actually about 10% or so that are earlier than that, and it's increasing, and we don't fully understand why. So teasing apart that, doing research to really understand what's driving these things, is really important.
Well, Riley and Justin, just being sensitive to time, thank you for everything. I mean, we hear a lot of people saying that this technology we have today will help us develop cures for cancer. And when you look at what Freenome has been able to do with their research and connecting in the ecosystem, you see how those statements can play out and be true, hopefully in the very near future. I think with colorectal cancer, obviously, if we can get everyone tested and before it spreads, help create that cure, like this is insight. So I just wanted to thank both of you guys for sharing how the research and technology and ecosystem coming together has really taken an idea and really brought it to people who need it. And so as we look at those billions of people around the globe that we want to help live healthier lives, this is a massive, massive step forward. So thank you, and thank you everyone for your phenomenal questions. This will be recorded and will be sent out at the end of the series, and hopefully we see you guys for summer camp number 3. Thank you, everyone.